6 months earlier, everyone in the company thought Daniel Carter had lost everything. He was fired in front of his entire department. His position, his income, and the respect he had spent years building disappeared in one afternoon. But 6 months later, when the same CEO laughed at him during a luxurious company party, he had no idea that the man standing quietly in front of him was no longer an employee. He was the new owner. The story began with a man who never wanted power. He only wanted to give his 2 children a safe and happy life. Daniel Carter was a 38-year-old single father raising his 8-year-old daughter Lily and his 5-year-old son Noah. After losing his wife to illness 3 years earlier, Daniel had become both a father and a mother to his children. Every morning started before sunrise. He prepared breakfast, packed school lunches, helped Noah find his missing shoes, and reminded Lily about her homework before rushing to work. Life was not easy. There were nights when Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table after his children went to sleep, looking at unpaid bills and wondering how he would manage everything. But whenever he felt tired, he looked at the drawings his children made for him. One drawing from Lily said, "My dad is my hero." Those simple words gave him enough strength to continue. Daniel worked as a senior operations manager at Hamilton Technologies, a growing software company. He had worked there for 11 years. He knew the company better than almost anyone. He knew the employees, the customers, and every mistake that could hurt the business. His colleagues respected him because Daniel never acted like a boss. If someone stayed late to finish a project, Daniel stayed with them. If a young employee made a mistake, he taught them instead of blaming them. But the company had changed after a new CEO, Richard Blake, took control. Richard was intelligent, ambitious, and focused only on numbers. He believed emotions had no place in business. During meetings, he often ignored employees' concerns and cared only about increasing profits. Daniel noticed problems others ignored. A major client was unhappy. Several experienced employees were leaving. The company's new strategy looked impressive on paper but had serious risks. During one meeting, Daniel finally spoke. "Mr. Blake, I think we should slow down before launching this project. We are missing some important details, and it could damage our relationship with our biggest clients." The room became silent. Richard looked at him. "Daniel, are you questioning my decision?" "I'm trying to protect the company," Daniel replied calmly. Richard smiled. "No, you're afraid of change." Daniel tried explaining the risks, but Richard had already made his decision. A few weeks later, the project failed exactly as Daniel predicted. The company lost a major contract. Instead of accepting responsibility, Richard needed someone to blame, and that person was Daniel. One Friday afternoon, Daniel was called into Richard's office. Richard sat behind his large glass desk while Daniel stood across from him. "We are restructuring the department," Richard said. Daniel immediately understood. "You saying I'm being removed?" Richard nodded. "Your position is no longer required." Daniel was shocked. After 11 years, Richard looked away. Business is business. Daniel wanted to defend himself. He wanted to remind Richard about everything he had done for the company. But then he thought about his children. He remembered Lily waiting for him at home. He remembered Noah asking that morning, "Daddy, will you be home for dinner tonight?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I understand." Richard handed him a small box for his belongings. As Daniel walked through the office carrying the box, people avoided looking at him. Some were embarrassed, some were shocked. Everyone knew Daniel was not the problem. Outside the building, Daniel sat in his car. For almost an hour, he didn't cry because he was weak. He cried because he was scared. How would he pay the rent? How would he support his children? How would he explain that Daddy had lost his job? That evening, Lily noticed something was wrong. "Dad, are you okay?" Daniel forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, but children always notice more than adults think." She quietly asked, "Did something happen at work?" Daniel looked at his daughter and finally told the truth. "I lost my job today." Lily became quiet. Then she reached across the table and held his hand. "It's okay, Dad, you always tell me that problems don't last forever." Those words stayed with Daniel. The next few weeks were the hardest weeks of his life. He applied for dozens of jobs. Many companies rejected him. Some said he was overqualified. Others never replied. He sold old furniture. He canceled unnecessary expenses. He stopped buying coffee outside. Every decision was about protecting his children. Then one evening, while looking through old documents, Daniel found something unexpected. Years earlier, he had invested a small amount of money into a technology startup created by a group of young engineers. He had almost forgotten about it. The company had grown quietly over the years. Daniel contacted them a few weeks later. He received a call. The startup wanted to buy another struggling technology company, and they needed someone with experience to guide the process. That someone was Daniel. For the first time in months, someone saw his value. But Daniel never imagined what would happen next. The struggling company they wanted to purchase was Hamilton Technologies, the same company that had fired him. Daniel had a choice. He could walk away. He could let Richard Blake continue running the company, or He could use this opportunity to rebuild the place that had once rejected him. After thinking about his children, his employees, and everything he had learned, Daniel made his decision. He became the largest investor, and 6 months after losing his job, Daniel Carter became the new owner of Hamilton Technologies. But he kept it secret. He wanted to see what kind of leader Richard truly was when he no longer knew Daniel had power over him. Then came the night of the annual company celebration, the night that would change everything. The ballroom was filled with expensive suits, bright lights, and people celebrating Hamilton Technologies' success. Richard Blake stood on stage receiving applause. He enjoyed the attention. "This company is successful because we make difficult decisions," Richard announced. Daniel stood quietly near the back of the room. He wore a simple black suit. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to observe. Several former co-workers recognized him. Some smiled, others looked surprised. One employee whispered, "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Daniel smiled. "Just enjoying the evening." Then Richard noticed him for a moment. Richard looked confused. Then he laughed. "Well, look who decided to come back." The people nearby became quiet. Daniel turned round. "Hello, Richard." Richard walked closer with a glass in his hand. "I heard you were having a difficult time after leaving us." Daniel said nothing. Richard continued. "I hope things worked out for you. Not everyone can handle the pressure of leadership." A few people looked uncomfortable. Daniel remained calm. "I've been doing well." Richard smiled. "Really? That's good. I was worried. You always seemed too comfortable making excuses instead of making decisions." Daniel looked at him. 6 months earlier, those words would have hurt deeply. But now they felt different. Because Daniel knew the truth, he wasn't the failure. Richard believed he was before Daniel could answer. Richard looked around at the guests. Daniel was a good employee, but employees sometimes forget their place. The room became silent. Daniel felt anger rise inside him. He thought about the day he was fired. He thought about his children watching him struggle, but he remembered something important. A leader doesn't react with anger. A leader chooses his actions carefully. So Daniel simply said, "I hope you have enjoyed your success, Richard." Richard laughed. "I have." Then he walked away. But the evening was not over. A few minutes later, the event host stepped onto the stage. "Before we continue, we have an important announcement regarding the future ownership of Hamilton Technologies." Everyone turned toward the stage. Richard smiled, expecting another achievement announcement. The host continued. "Today, we officially welcome our new owner and chairman." Richard adjusted his jacket proudly. Then the host said, "Please welcome Mr. Daniel Carter." The entire room froze. Richard's smile disappeared. Slowly, everyone turned toward Daniel. Daniel walked toward the stage. No anger, no revenge, just calm confidence. Richard stood completely still. This is impossible." Daniel looked at him. 6 months ago, you told me business is business." Richard couldn't answer. The announcement continued. Daniel was now responsible for the future direction of the company. The same company that once removed him now belonged to him. But the biggest surprise was not his success. It was what he decided to do next. After the announcement, Daniel called a private meeting with senior managers. Everyone expected him to remove Richard immediately. They expected revenge. Instead, Daniel said, "I don't want to destroy anyone's career because of my past experience." Everyone looked surprised. "But leadership requires accountability," Daniel continued. "We will review every decision. We will fix what is broken, and we will build a company where people are respected." One manager asked, "What about Richard?" Daniel paused. He remembered the humiliation. He remembered the pain. Then he said, "Richard made mistakes, but we will handle them fairly." That night, Daniel returned home late. His children were still awake. Lily ran toward him. "Dad, did you have a good night?" Daniel smiled. "It was an important night." Noah looked curious. "Did you win something?" Daniel picked him up. "Yes, what?" Daniel looked at both children. "I won the chance to make things better." Lily smiled, but she noticed something. "Dad, why do you look sad?" Daniel sat beside them. "Because even after becoming successful, he still remembered the hardest days. I just wish your mom could to have seen this." The room became quiet. Lily hugged him. She would be proud. Daniel held his children tightly. And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. But the next morning he received an unexpected message from Richard. It simply said, "We need to talk." Daniel knew this conversation would decide the future of both men. The next morning, Daniel arrived early at the office. The building looked the same. The same entrance. The same hallways, but everything felt different. He was no longer walking in as an employee afraid of losing his job. He was walking in as someone responsible for hundreds of families. Richard entered the office quietly. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked tired. "I owe you an apology," Richard said. Daniel remained silent. Richard continued, "When I fired you, I thought you were weak. I thought you couldn't handle pressure." He looked down. "But I was wrong." Daniel sat back. "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard took a deep breath. "Because yesterday, Everyone saw something I didn't understand. What? You had every reason to destroy me. But you didn't. Daniel looked out the window. I know what it feels. I like to lose everything because someone decides you don't matter. Richard looked ashamed. I treated people like numbers. Daniel nodded. That is why this company was struggling. The conversation lasted for almost an hour. Daniel didn't forget what happened, but he also didn't allow the past to control his future. He gave Richard a choice. He could leave with respect, or he could stay and help repair the damage he had created under new leadership. Richard accepted a reduced role, focused on rebuilding client relationships. Not because Daniel trusted him completely, but because Daniel believed people could change. Months passed. Hamilton Technologies became a better company. Employees felt heard. Managers worked together. People who had once feared losing their jobs started believing in the future again. And Daniel's children noticed the biggest change. Their father smiled more. One evening, Lily asked, "Dad, are you happy now?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he answered, "I'm happy because I learned something important." What? Success isn't about proving someone wrong. He looked at his children. Success is becoming someone you are proud to be. Years later, Daniel still remembered that party. Not because Richard had embarrassed him, not because he became the owner, but because that night showed him who he truly was. A man who lost his job but never lost his values. A father who struggled but never gave up. A leader who gained power but chose kindness. The biggest victory was not owning a company. The biggest victory was showing his children that difficult moments do not define a person. Choices do.